Bill Owens once said, "A strong economy begins with a strong and well-educated workforce." Keep this in mind as we discuss today the Belt and Road Initiative and what impact this will have on the global economy. My name is Dr. David Oualaalou.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
The quote that you did earlier couldn't have been more appropriate. We see China with more than 1 million graduates every year in engineering and science, which really prepares them for the BRI, which is the biggest project ever undertaken by human beings. The most costly also. Some estimates go as high as $8 trillion. That's huge. And it could possibly lead to enormous wealth for all the participants and an enormous impact on the world economy of China, as it already is the world leader economically.
Well, that's correct, Ross. But first of all, just for our viewers to know what we're talking about here, the Belt and Road Initiative was a project that was launched by President Xi Jinping back in 2013, and it will go all the way to 2049, and we're gonna get into that, why that date is very important. And at the description we will have a link that will go into detail as to what this BRI is all about. Well, you are correct, Ross. Yes, the cost exceeds $1 trillion. That means also far beyond the GDP of some countries. And
Most countries.
That is correct. And why is that crucial? Is because China is thinking about it in a long term. As I said earlier, why 2049 is important to China?
100-year anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party.
That's correct. So that gives us an idea how far China think ahead, because they don't have to worry about the next 4-year election cycle. So it's something they don't worry about.
And they also don't have the same internal conflict that, say, there is in the United States. It's not back and forth and who can get the next dig in on somebody else.
That's correct. They don't have to deal with this.
Interestingly, if you make too much noise, you sort of lose power in China.
That's how it works. So they don't have to worry about nonsense. But let us dig a little bit deeper into the implications of what this BRI is all about and how it's going to have a tremendous impact geopolitically and economically on many countries where that route is going to go through.
If you take a look at a map of all the places this goes, it's every continent. It's 138 countries.
That is correct, Ross. And the interesting thing about this Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, is that it will have 2 tracks. One of them on land and the other one on the sea. That explains why China, for example, went ahead and leased the port in Djibouti for 10 years. That explains also why China went ahead and leased the port in Gwadar in Pakistan for 40 years. And that explains also why China leased the port in Malacca for 99 years. Now, one of the key aspects to this is when you look at the Indian Ocean, where Djibouti has access to, where Malacca has access to, and where Gwadar port, the waters have access to that. 1/4 of the commodities transits through the Indian Ocean. So you can just see why China is doing this.
So what we're going to see is a massive infrastructure growth.
That is correct, Ross. And we're talking about a major infrastructure. We're not talking about a paved road here. We're talking about a railroad system. We're talking about bridges. We're talking about dams. We're talking about telecommunications. We're talking about mega projects.
And one of the things about this is that when these countries are making loans are accepting loans from China, and let's say for a port. Well, they're also now guaranteed that China's going to use that port, so it's not wasted money. So there's a real potential for that country who's hosting that port to do financially quite well.
Assuming there is no corruption within
Oh.
countries like this. Because here's the deal. Those countries, they know what they're getting into. The reason being because China's going to provide the loans, but if you don't pay the loan back, guess what? They're going to have to confiscate some of your land or some of this project or the port or whatever. It's like what China was doing in Africa, at least back in 2012, before the BRI was initiated. And I recall, because I was working on my PhD dissertation at the time, and my research led me to find out that China was investing about $112 billion back then in Africa. Now, what infrastructure Africa has?
Almost none.
Almost none. But they do have one commodity that China is very, very interested in, which is rare earth minerals.
That's one of the big advantages of this Belt Road Initiative, in that the infrastructure could now support the Chinese getting access to the resources of these particular countries.
That's correct. And this is why we said earlier, Russ, that the whole initiative, the BRI, originates and ends in China. It's almost like a circle. It's going to go around the world, start in China, and go back to China. So,
when they're going to manufacture things and put them out for the whole world as commodities.
that's correct. Now, the implication of that geopolitically, you can just see where it's going. The top countries in the world economically are already not happy with where China's going with this, because that's going to change the dynamics. And which dynamics I'm referring to here? Historically speaking, any country that expands economically is going to expand militarily. The British did it, the
certainly
Portuguese, the French, the Spaniards, the Americans, and now it's China's turn. So the question is, why are we having all this fear-mongering about China when China is doing it and other countries did before that? And my reason for mentioning that, because now you even start to notice there are some tensions in some Western countries, especially the head of the intelligence services. They are arguing for and against this fear-mongering towards China, whether it's warranted or not. So you think of the former head of the MI6, Sir Alex Younger, who's saying there is no need for this fear-mongering. You look at his counterpart in Britain, the head of MI5, who's saying China is the problem. China, we need to be concerned about it. You look at the head of the BNP, the intelligence services in Germany, who just retired. His name is Gerhard Schindler, just retired. What he's saying was, you're going to have to fear the dominance of China. Oh my gosh, China's coming and is going to dominate the world.
Well, economically, they're certainly going to be a powerhouse. But what we don't see is them having hundreds of
the military bases and all that around the world.
What we don't see is hundreds of military bases around the world, the way the United States has done.
And the cost that is associated with that. I mean, why do we need to have over almost 650 or 700 bases around the world? And can you just imagine the cost of that? And this is why the Pentagon's budget will never go down. The Pentagon budget is always going up at the expense of the taxpayers. So, because the arguments for the United States government is that, well, we need to have a strong military. China's thinking about it a little bit differently. China's thinking about it, do I need to build 10 aircraft carrier, or do I need to build an infrastructure that's going to facilitate the transfer of goods and so forth? And you can see why they're doing what they're doing. So, there is also another major element into all this, which will have an implication geopolitically. And this one is more of economic trend aspects to it. And that has to do with the digital yuan. You're absolutely correct.
And the projection is that all the countries dealing with China are going to have to deal with the digital yuan at the expense of
the dollar.
The dollar.
That is correct. And this is why, when you think about it, China's looking at it this way. You got 138 countries. That's half of the world almost.
Yeah.
There are about 202 countries around the world. That's almost half. Can you imagine if this half of the world is dealing with you in your currency? Second thing, if you see why this is working or it's going to work for China, just notice the elect president in the United States, Joe Biden, he already announced that 3 of his top priorities are as follows: oil, the dollar, and China. What does 3 elements have in common? Is China is taking the lead on all 3.
Yes.
As far as consumption, as far as production, and as far as the long strategy, what China has.
What do you see as the impact on the American economy?
Well, this one obviously is going to have an impact on it. In a way, I see it is if the United States, which is why I believe President-elect made this a priority, because he needed to renegotiate the trades with China. Otherwise, we're going to keep seeing prices going up in America. And that's, any administration won't want that. The last thing you want is the price of commodities in the US goes up. We get used to buying a Nike for $75. We get used to buying a bike for, what, how much? $100 or whatever
Right.
it is. Do we want to pay $500 for a pair of Nike? Do we want to pay $700 for a bike? I don't think so. And that is one of the reasons why the concern from the next administration has to do with, we better fix the trade with China. So, because if we don't, this BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, is moving forward whether we like it or not. And what's going to happen is other countries are going to subscribe. They already subscribed to it.
138 of them.
Yeah. And rather than importing the goods from the United States, they're going to be importing the goods from China.
Do you think that this means also that China is going to control the natural resources, and natural resources that the United States is importing from other countries are going to be in short supply?
Well, I won't say, but that's competition. That's economy.
right.
That's business.
Right.
I mean, won't you do the same?
I would.
Ah, well, that's how business is. It's because, except that China's going about it differently than what the United States did before, or any other superpower before the United States emergence. It's going to be a competition over resources. But that's just part of it. And that becomes the question of whether we're going to see a new alliances emerging in light of because what the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, is going to do is going to rearrange the seats on the geopolitical table around the world.
It's inevitable.
Yeah, whether we like it or not. And it's not a matter of if, but a rather of when. And this is why China, when they launched the BRI in 2013, they didn't put that initiative for a year or 2 or 3. They put it all the way to 2049. You got plenty of time for them to think in terms of how much they can accomplish.
You know, over and over again we discuss China's got long-term plans going. It doesn't matter what it is. They've got a long-term plan.
And also because China is run by engineers, while the United States is run by lawyers. Just look at our political landscape and it will give you an idea of where things are. So, this BRI, as I said, is going to have a major change. And a lot of countries is going to see, for them, they're going to start to think in terms of benefits, economic benefits.
As they should.
Yeah. When you start to see your infrastructure up to where it needs to be, you're going to subscribe to something like that. Now the question becomes is, you need to know what are you getting into. Can you afford it or not? And this is where it's going to be the tricky part. I recall a true story that was not reported much in the media. And it happened in Morocco when China wanted to do a project in Tangier. It's a city up north, which is closer to Spain, just through the Mediterranean. It's about 45 by ferry or so. And China wanted to build the smart city. But China wants to take over all the projects. But something like that created a concern. His Majesty said, I don't think so.
You know, that's a concern for all the countries involved in this, in the BRI. Because the Chinese are not only bringing all their engineers in, they're also bringing the labor in.
Well, that's correct because they want to build, that's going to create economic opportunities for China, but also this is why you don't hear much about unemployment in China and so forth. Just because those projects that they are involved around the world, bring in the Chinese workforce. Now, there are some countries where those projects are going to be. One of the requirements is they're requesting from the Chinese companies that they will employ a certain number of the locals. And China does that. However, the engineers and the managers and the people in charge of projects
Are all Chinese.
Yes, that's
Clearly.
I've noticed that in Africa. Same thing in Gwadar in Pakistan, where they built now the entire set. Now you get trains from the eastern side of China can cross all the way through Gwadar.
You know, one of the projections is that there's a train that starts in Beijing and ends up, I think, in Rotterdam.
In London.
In London.
And it goes through because the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, is going through Europe, through Italy, and you can just see countries going to be thinking in terms of the challenges that the United States is facing, the tensions that exist, political that is, and these issues of trade. They're going to start seeing the opportunity. Well, if China is paving all this path for economic opportunities, we may as well just subscribe to it. And this is why the head of the former head rather of the German intelligence, when he said what he said, that we need to fear China's dominance and all this, some companies in China, in Germany rather, were like, what are you talking about? Most of our semiconducting business is done in China.
If you were going to say there's a bottom line as to what Americans should be paying attention to, what would you say it is?
Well, it would be just to understand as to how that's going to impact our pockets. Because the way you can always measure that is by if you start seeing prices going up, then you know something it's not working. And we better be prepared to understand what the implication of this BRI on a global scale.
You know, our invitation is, don't be distracted by what dress the First Lady is wearing. These important issues impact our economy and impact our personal lives and our finances. And,
as always, stay informed. Till next time.